Very excited.
But
I'm Deborah Hodgkins, Professor of English and Coordinator of Humanities, and a couple of other titles I will spare you, but they both involve writing. On behalf of the English program, the Libra Distinguished Lecturer Series, and the newly formed Symposium Organizing Committee, it is my great pleasure to welcome you to the Voices in the North Country Writers Symposium. The title of our event today comes from a writers' conference that was held in 1994, 1996, and last in 2000. The featured publishers were authors all from Maine in the genres of poetry, fiction, and creative nonfiction, exploring their craft, exploring the teaching of writing, and how literature affects our perception of human experience and cultural global issues. I must confess that I was there at the last one in 2000. I have the t-shirt to prove it. I almost brought that to hold it up, and I thought, well, that might be obnoxious. But that's the only reason I know when the date was, because I can go in my drawer and I can look at the t-shirt. And it was a wonderful, wonderful experience. So we mark this as a return in a more modest form, at least starting out, as an afternoon and evening symposium with the goal of making this literary event a more regular one moving forward. We would not be here today, however, without the persistence of one of our alumna from the English program, Melissa Lazoff, who will be speaking in just a moment, class of 2017, whose efforts in reaching out to both myself and to Rachel Rice with the goal of starting a writer's series on campus have resulted in the event we're having today. So, welcome, and I will present to you Melissa.
Good afternoon, everyone. Well, thank you for helping us welcome this revived Voices in the North Country Symposium to the UMPI campus. As Dr. Hodgkins noted, I am an alum of UMPI's English program, having graduated in 2017 with a writing concentration. Being part of this revived symposium for Voices in the North Country has allowed me to embrace two things that have become my biggest passions in life: creative writing, as well as opportunities to teach others about the challenges and rewards of pursuing success as a writer. Regardless of your backgrounds in creative writing, I hope that this afternoon's readings and discussion panel allows you to embrace your own creativity. Thanks to the hard work and dedication of my fellow planning committee members, I know we can restore Voices in the North Country as an important cultural event for both the campus and local community. It's my pleasure to announce our first reader this afternoon, who is a familiar face to both the campus and community. Alice Boltres is an UMPI alum and was recently retired from the Maine School of Science and Mathematics, where she was an English instructor. Alice has published 2 books, the experimental novel Oppression for the Heaven of It, and her poetry chapbook Chance and Choice. Today she will be reading some of her poems. Please help me welcome Alice Boltres.
Nice to follow Melissa because I don't have to adjust the microphone, right? Thank you, Melissa. And thanks to the planning committee. I was supposed to be on it, but I only got to 1 meeting, so I'm really grateful that this is being revived. Today, in keeping with the theme, Writing What You Know, I decided to read 3 poems that incorporate that idea of writing what you know, but also they're travel poems that I did some traveling to find out what I didn't know about a lot of things, places I've never been, and people I'd never met that I wanted to meet. And so I think these poems illustrate what I know and how I use it in my poems, but also exploring what I don't know. I'm going to start with a poem called Compass, which was published first in, excuse me, in the Northern Line, which was published by University of Maine at Fort Kent for a time in the early 90s. Compass. I'm using fathers, the one mother gave me when he died. A woodsman and hunter at home all his life, he knew too much about his land to make practical use of this gift. Instead, he liked to play with it. Using a flat world map, he charted the angle of direction to the dig at Olduvai Gorge, where archaeologists Lewis and Mary Leakey demonstrated that humans evolved in Africa. I carried it in my Voyager, zigzagging west across the US, down the Pacific coast and back, east across the Southwest. But this is the first time I've looked at it. And for this, to find the angle of direction from here to Texas, from here in Texas to home in Maine, northeast, 45 degrees. Playing, I hold it upright, discover this position disturbs the action. It takes two full turns of the dial to force the needle all the way around once. With this, I forget my reason for hunting the way home, wondering at the drag from the earth's north that slows the upright turn, at powers that pull and push and hold us oscillating. Next poem was published in Slant, a journal of poetry. Again, this was in the 90s. These are some of my earliest poems, my earliest published poems. This is late November from Sandhager Place, Cincinnati. I live on the edge of a cliff, but I realized only gradually, because in August, when I moved here, there was no view, foliage too dense. Now, trees are bare black silhouettes, except edges that catch sunlight, and my window frames a view of the Ohio River in the distance. Just a ragged triangle of light from here. A treetop in the foreground, branches in three, and supports in the fork a large nest. The upper edge of the window cuts the branches evenly, so it looks like the three-legged stool, inverted, that Father used in Maine. He made one for the house, polished with a backrest. It looked funny. I laughed, and he explained the principle of Trinitarian support. You have to have at least three, he said, to balance the support. Imagine a stool with only one leg or only two. I laughed harder, picturing us all toppling wherever we sat. And four is more than needed, he said, just for looks. I see it better in this view, late and spare. Delicate as brown leaves and down feathers, it all sways in the wind. A lace of black branches, a fall empty nest, light on water and on edges. And the last one I'll read is Covenant, published in the Cincinnati Poetry Review in the late 80s. This begins with an epigram, quotation from Tom Picard, a British poet. Covenant. Dissolve, dissolve, dissolve into a fish's eye, and still dissolve. That's the quotation. On Highway 81 in New Mexico, light dims ahead under clouds moving east. They pour dark water in thick threads. Sunshine dissolves and splits late afternoon with a rainbow that arches the highway with color. Behind, the sun brightened earth colors, flooded mountain, butte, and prairie with light, as it must have after Noah's God made his rainbow. Mating desire with contrition, he moved his hand, split light to sign, and then dissolved. His signature still shines through water and blows slower today than I can drive. Water will drench my Voyager and color asphalt with slick black, but caution dissolves like the scattering of storm light into the lure of color curved. If I move faster than wind, I will catch this rainbow. Not like the pilot who saw a rainbow from above, a full circle over water-soaked clouds. He didn't dare move down through that rounded color, didn't dare fall into the dark light of his storm's heart and dissolve. On this road, thoughts of his dissolution tempts me to pursue this rainbow. I press hard to leave bright light behind, risk speeding on slick water, rush towards splashing, chase color, wooing his signature moves me. And then he calls in thunder, moves in lightning to lift my skin, dissolves me into original watercolor I pass through to dissolve the rainbow. The storm hits, pours its water in sheets, blinds me until I come into light again, dark light behind, desire conceived to move through a circle of water, fly through and dissolve a full rainbow, absolve, split, forgive, unknowable color. Thank you.
Our next writer is Pat Toppin, who will read a poem that was recently published in Upcountry, the student literary journal at UMPI.
This poem, my only poem, is called Belly Dance. Summer draped your brown body in green veils, but now oranges, reds, and yellows adorn you as you begin the most exquisite, controlled shimmy. Slender snake arms move with the wind, your oud, as diaphanous colors drop from your limbs and bestow a Persian carpet at your dusky roots. No grotesque twerking nor grinding despoils you as you exhibit the discipline of the subtle flutter. With high wind, your hip circles are perfection, ancient art. In deep winter, you celebrate privately in your harem. The breeze on your clicking, glistening branches, your zills, your nakedness between the moon and shadows, your joy. But I watch from my window, frosted, save for my breath spots. I gape at your abandon as you sway, limbs above your crown, and my heartbeat shyly yearns to be your rhythmic tabla. I creep out, clumsy and thick, in sweaters, coat, gloves, hats, jeans, and duct tape boots, to join, to attempt your dance. And I am welcome as your lower branches quiver to caress me. With arms above my head, I twirl, whirl, and dervish a hole in the snow, collapsing into it breathless, laughing, warm in the cold. The stars, planets, moon, and my dancers ululate their approval. I skim inside, losing wet boots, hat, gloves, jeans, sweaters, and swap them for the heavy flannel of my ponderous sleep. But my heart still beats out the music, ancient drums. I move to the sedentary shutters, erasing the dust as I coax them open. The moon leaps into my room and wraps itself around me. It sweeps into the ceiling corners, startling the cobwebs. And outside, my wild troupe continues its performance. I tear off the flannel, hurl it to the floor, kick it under a shadow, and in bed, I embrace the glow to dream with chiaroscuro as covers. The wadi begins to fill, and I sip and then gulp the memories. I remount my blanketed and beaded camel for the return journey. Ancient art, drums, animal, memories, oasis. Thank you.
Up next is Anthony Stott. Some of you may know Anthony as an English instructor at the Main School of Science and Mathematics in Limestone, but he also taught at UMPI for a period of time. Anthony will be reading from his poetry collection, The Year Things Came Apart. Please welcome Anthony Stott.
I think there's any adjusting this microphone anyway.
You can adjust the whole podium by pushing that button on the right corner.
I probably won't need it. Coming home, coming home, never more to roam. Race South, October 2007. Just yesterday, Dad was gray, and his lips thin blue lines, parting, gasping at too many steps, too many words, too many breaths. So Portland sent him to Boston, and Mom's call, it's not good, sent us down US 1 to Holton, driving down 95 past Old Town, praying, we're coming, how is he? Through Augusta, Portland, driving. The LASIK seemed to be helping. Still driving, praying, driving, and then we were parking, walking, sidewalks, halls, doors, the door, and he was still gray, but breathing easier. Breathing easier. You should have seen his ankles, Mom said. So many bags of fluid, but his oxygen is up. This isn't good for his kidneys. I held her hand. She shook her head. He needs a heart. He's on the list, him and 100 others. I don't know. She looked up at me, tired and red-eyed. But he's stable for now. Breathing room. The waiting room. His room. Cafeteria. Hotel room. His room. Waiting room. Cafeteria. His room. The waiting. Eternity keeping him for observation. We decide to eat a meal in a place where people's voices rise and fall at the pace of peace, with the room filling noise of confidence, where food comes fresh with a waitress rather than specimens behind glass, waiting for dissection. And why not? He's still stable. We decide to see some sights, to walk open streets, to breathe, to share crisp October air with the witches and the Puritans, the ghosts who stalk the dark, clapboard and red brick of Salem this time of year. After all, he's stable, isn't he? What time is it? My phone. Missed calls. How? There's a heart. Come quick. They're prepping him. Come quick. We've prayed with him. He's in the OR. Waiting room. Waiting room. Waiting. The doctor, nodding, smiling, crying, thanking, hugging, breathing. March 2014. Excerpt from the sermon, Are You Beautiful? In his lifetime, my father was the model Pentecostal man, Sunday school superintendent, tenor in the quartet, bass player, church board member, a model son from a model church family. But 9 months ago, he waited until my mother left for work, cleaned out the bank account, and moved in with another one. Upon Dad's public dissolution, you were shocked when he did what he did. I wasn't. It's crazy, you said, when he did what he did, and I agreed. But for you, it was a fresh burst of lunacy, a hernia in the otherwise strong wall of his mental tissue. Not for me. For me, it was a break I'd hoped would never come. A pulsing bulge of crazy I'd hoped would stay tucked behind the stretched, scarred membrane of his image. I had hoped his body would fall apart before his mind, his morals, and his reputation. And for the last few years, it seemed the grave would be his final hiding place, that he would get to dissolve 6 feet under with no one knowing but me. Expiration, Part A. It's dark out. Jesus said, aren't there 12 hours of day? If a man walks in the day, he won't stumble because he sees the light of this world. Because if he walks in the light, he stumbles not. But he stumbles when he has no light in himself. Dad stayed up past his bedtime. Expiration Part B, no good. He got a new heart for his worthless one. But I wonder if people have expiration dates. What if after a certain day, month, year, they sour if kept around? When Dad got a new heart, his kidneys went. So he got dialysis, then his morality went. Docs and drugs sustained his body past what his heart was worth. Passing along the border, the fog dims sister to the snow, hugs the firm shoulders, hips of her sibling along the road. Spruce, fir, and the bones of maple, dark ghosts solidify, then vanish again. My foot nudges the pedal. I glide through this between, this merging of solid and shade, before and after. The heart of my machine feels strong, but ahead, 3 sets of warm red eyes I followed long are swallowed, gone, gone in, gone. Excerpt 2 from the sermon, Are You Beautiful? The question. 9 months ago, a life considered the model of Pentecostal beauty filled our lives with ugliness. The woman he took up with had a history of volatility. Rapidly, his health began to break. 4 weeks ago, he went into the hospital with heart failure. 2 weeks ago, he went back. A week ago, on Sunday night, he and she were home. He called me. His lungs were so full of fluid that he could barely talk. His mind was so clouded that he couldn't keep track of the conversation. Son, he said, tomorrow we're going to get married. Right after dialysis, we're getting married. But Monday in a parking lot, after dialysis, he collapsed. Monday night, wrapped in a blanket by my sister's fire, he died. We heard that woman abandoned him on the pavement where he fell, leaving before the EMTs arrived. We heard about frequent fights between them. We had heard 100 hateful stories. Then, while trying to make decisions about his remains, we heard on Wednesday he had made her the beneficiary, leaving us to pay for the arrangements. After everything, this woman, this brawler, the adulteress, got the money. She tried to call us Monday night and Tuesday, ringing my phone, my sister's phone, my brother's. We didn't have the stomach to talk to her. How could she call us after what she had done? She wanted to be included in the funeral, to shoulder into our grieving process. How could she even ask such a thing? On Thursday, as I exited a coffee shop, a woman walked toward me. I had only seen a couple of pictures of her on Facebook, so I didn't recognize her at first. But she could see my father in me. Not sure which son I was, she called me by my brother's name, Jonathan. I realized who she was as I heard myself say, still walking, "No, I'm not Jonathan." "Anthony?" I stopped. "I've been trying to call you," she said. "The funeral home said they burned him up this morning. I don't know what to do. Can I hug you?" As she came apart in the parking lot, the things I'd wanted to say since Monday turned to ash in my mouth. Yes, she was at the center of my family's pain. Yes, she was my father's mistress. But at that moment, she was a lonely, broken person in pain. Her life, never mind my judgments about that life, had been blasted to pieces. I could have fortified myself there on the moral high ground, could have cut her with the razor thoughts I'd been thinking all week, but you tell me, what kind of a person would that have made me? I would have thought myself righteous, but I would have been ugly. I started preparing this sermon 2 weeks ago. But how could I have stood before you? How could I have asked this fundamental question, are you beautiful, with integrity, if I had cut into that wrecked soul? Instead, I hugged her, and as she broke, I did too. Stand there now. He stood, his arm as gray and knobby as the tree he clung to. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" I asked. With his other limb trembling, he motioned across the expanse of the field. "For all this," he said. The field was stiff stubble and ice-edged, broken here and there by skeletal trees clawing at gunmetal sky. At his insistence, I had helped him from the warmth of the house for this small prize, small favor. Then I realized that this January landscape would be his last. The gray was vibrant in the light of soon not seen. The chill was exquisite in the sense of soon not feeling. I realized how beautiful it must be standing where he stood, made so by his decision to relish, not rue it. I realized how beautiful it could be if I, instead of waiting for death's escort, if I too chose to stand there now. Farewell to Father. I release you as your atoms lose electric claim to your soul. I release you as your struggles dissolve and let you go. I let you go. Now go wherever the mystic winds will carry. Go. Be what grows when our notions are all buried. It's not right to keep you when you so needed rest. I'm sorry what I thought was best. It's best to forget what you should have done or been. It's best to only hold what you were here at the end. So go. Go and be. Your memories are safe now with me. Managing Expectations, Part A. I lecture my son, as dads are wont to do, on the power of his desires. What two things create disappointment? I say. His eyes slide down in the way he groans. Come on, I insist. Two things. With eyelids half closed, he stares and says, what happens? What we want to happen. I nod. When they don't match, then there's nothing wrong with wanting to go to Luke's, he says. There's nothing wrong with going to Luke's necessarily, I say. There is something wrong with driving 30 minutes round trip when I have a quarter tank of gas and no paycheck till Thursday. Whatever, he says, and he storms away. Stop, I bark. We're not done talking. Why not? I've given up on what I want. Isn't that what you want me to do? What I want you to do is see how your desire fuels your emotions. What I want you to do is learn how to flex instead of fixate on what is momentarily out of reach. I don't want you to be a puppet of your passions. So you can't go to Luke's. What can you do? Managing Expectations, Part B. It's a scene that plays and replays between my son and me, between my daughter and me. The clash of impulsive teen years with my years as a pastor, then a teacher. And in my 40s, I'm still trying to master these lessons myself, bracketed between their youthful push behind and the mortality of those just ahead, between their reckless rush forward and my mother's urgent breaking. She lost her husband last spring. I lost my father last spring. They lost their papa last spring. What I wanted to happen was for him to get better, to get stronger, to help me paddle the John boat one more time through sun-dappled pools with my kids in the middle. What I wanted to happen was for him to rise before dawn again on chilly October mornings, to walk quietly on the border of overgrown pastures and pines and share the poetry of awakening wild things with me, with them. That's what I wanted to happen. That's not what happened. I can't do those things, not with him now. So I look at them and ask myself, okay, Dad, what can we do? I know my Father will be waiting with arms open wide. There is just no place. There is just no place. There is just no place like home. Thank you.
Next writer is UMPI student Manish Pandey. Manish is a business major with a minor in English. He was most recently published in UMPI's literary journal Upcountry, and today he'll be reading a story that he recently finished entitled A Peculiar Shade of Blue. Please welcome Manish Pandey.
Hi, can you hear me? Yes. All right, great. My name is Manish. I'm from Nepal. I'm a junior. So today I'll be reading a story called A Peculiar Shade of Blue. I wrote this. I was rewriting this again this morning, so I have not practiced. So but I'll do my best. A Peculiar Shade of Blue. 3 kids arrived at my house today. It was a little before noon, and they introduced themselves as the anti-elitist. It sounded like an indie band to me, I told them. This cracked them up. Actually, the only girl in the group even admitted to liking indie pop, so I did not feel too bad. There was a blonde kid, a brown kid with an American accent. He told me his parents were from Casta, I could tell, and a girl in a maroon hijab. They all seemed fairly young, the oldest person probably not more than 21. Both the guys were clean-shaven, so young that the gray shadow on their upper lip was barely visible, and a fragrance hung around them as if they had just taken a shower. They seemed like nice kids, so I did not send them back. Also, I did not want to be labeled a grumpy old man, although I do consider myself to be middle-aged. The kids don't care, I'm sure. Older, middle-aged, it's all the same to them. My desire for their approval was embarrassing, really. Irene served them milk tea and cookies. Not for a second did she stand still. The food kept coming out as if she was trapped in some great myth, punished by Jews to keep serving food till eternity. We are childless and we don't know why. It does not bother us too much. At least that is what I'd like to think. What else can we do? Irene's 49 and I'm 51. A wilted smile hung on her lips when she looked at the kids, and I felt dejected just looking at her. I asked the kids how they had found my address. Google, the brown kid told me. I knew you were a professor at some university in Maine. I just didn't know which one. I'm Aryan, by the way, he said with a beaming smile. He appeared to be in charge. The other two were Lucas and Mariam. We were all seated outside on the patio. The sun was warm, so I did not open the umbrella. There was a table between us. It felt like an interview. So what brings you here, I said. We're writing a book on your best friend, Sahil, Aryan said. We thought you could provide us some stories. I felt nauseous at the back of my throat, as if I was strapped to a roller coaster stranded at a horrifying height, unsure when it would plummet. Something tugged at me, a feeling I could not give a shape. A feeling I could not give a recognizable shape to. A feeling of irrevocable loss, maybe. I felt light, like a bird with hollow bones, the marrow all sucked off. The kids were looking at me, waiting for an answer. Sorry, I was just caught off guard. I guess I should have understood from the name. I didn't give it much thought, obviously, I said. So how's Sahil doing? He's fine. Honestly, we haven't heard from him for almost a year now. He has bigger fish to fry, Aryan said, while dipping a cookie in his tea. So, are you guys in the same organization as him? How does this work, I asked. No, we're more like fans, Mariam said, as Aryan occupied himself drinking tea. This took me a while to process, if I even had it in me to process it, what was happening. We basically want to follow in his footsteps, Lucas explained. We're united for Sahil's cause because we believe in it. It's a change that's necessary to us, Lucas resumed. More abstractions, I thought. I rubbed my face with my palms. The sun was in front of my eyes and I had to squint a little. The sky felt too bright. So what's this cause that you guys speak of, I asked. Well, in simple terms, global equality, Aryan said, sipping his tea. Global equality, I said. Equality, like it's mentioned in Sahil's book, equality in the postmodern era. I'm sure you've read it, Lucas said just I told them I had not. They exchanged perplexed looks with each other. I know of it, I offered as an explanation. I knew that soon after the publication, his burgeoning popularity had attracted a cult following, essentially catapulting him to stardom. Once upon a time, I could have turned my TV on to any news channel, and I would have found him embroiled in the art of political polemics. Your best friend's a genius, Aryan said. How have you not read it, if you don't mind me asking? We don't really have such a relationship anymore, I answered. The words fell straight coming out of my mouth. He's my childhood friend, one who I was exceptionally close to, but things changed with time. I met him several years back, and there was a gulf between us. We didn't even exist in the same planes of reality. A year ago, there was this special event for fans. We were there. He talked about you. He seemed really happy, Lucas said. The sun was right above my head now, pouring down on me. I felt hot and red, like a boiled lobster. The kids seemed to be doing fine, though. I clasped my hands. So what are you guys seeking? I know you said something about writing a book. We're trying to commemorate him with a book, a present, if you will. It's kind of like a biography. So if you could provide us some stories from Sahil's Hill, that would be great. Anything that you can vividly remember. Details about his quirks, mannerisms, his habits, whatever you can recall. No pressure, Iron said. Irene brought more tea along with pastries. The kids poured tea into their cups while the sun poured its light on me. Waterfall of light, I thought, and I was under it. I hesitated. How was I going to frame this? I want to help you guys, I said. I really do. But I don't know if you have Sahil's permission. Plus, we do, Iron cut me off, eager and radiant. In the same event that Lucas mentioned, we obtained his permission. In fact, that's when we formed a group to undertake this. I have no proof to show for it, but please believe us. We've been researching for a whole year now. We even visited Casa together a while ago. The plane ride was agonizing. I'm not even used to it though. I go back and forth twice a year. Why did you make a trip to Casa? I inquired. We visited the school Sahil studied in, roamed around, interviewed Sahil's parents. They seem to be very fond of you. They said they haven't seen you since your mom's funeral. That was 5 years ago. We came here for something we believe in. Please help us out, Irene implored. Irene was looking at me. I understood what she wanted me to do. I needed to think about it though, and that is what I told him. Sure, take your time, Irene said. We really feel bad for barging in like this. Thank you for being understanding. My wife went to see them out. I leaned back. I was all alone. The sky, a peculiar shade of blue, like the blue screen computers display when the system crashes. A blue tinged with the sense of the absurd. And I was 18 again. It was a little before noon, and the Communist Party of Casa had called for a bund, a strike, because of a hike in the price of fuel. My mom did not favor the bund and cursed the whole party, calling the chairman, in more profane terms of course, a burden on the planet and a pseudo-commie, a wrath being an abundant and liberating expression of the importance she attached to my education, and in the presence of which I felt such an urgency to leave our three-room apartment that I headed over to Sahil's house without having lunch. Before leaving my apartment, I grabbed the book Sahil had lent me, Mishima's Confession of a Mask. The absence of the usual loud bustle, usually contributed by the vehicles on the road and the pedestrians on the sidewalk, felt profound when I faced the main road, as Casa simmered quietly in the heat, like stew bubbling under a lid. There were a few protesters and 3 policemen swarming around the four-way junction. The sky was absurdly blue like the shirts of the police, and the neatly punctuated white clouds looked like a squadron of alien ships in formation. Both parties at the junction appeared extremely relaxed, even in the summer heat, as if it would not be surprising to see them exchange high fives at any moment. Deciding to abandon this placid spectacle, I crossed the road and entered the alleyway straight ahead, in the middle of 2 stores, whose rusty metal shutters were pulled down because of the bund. The alleyway opened up to a dirt road, and when I was past the rear of the U.S. consulate, I found myself in the upper middle class neighborhood, where houses were elaborate symbols for owners with expensive hobbies. The husbands probably played golf, and the housewives probably invested their time growing their bonsai tree, designed with a concern for aesthetics, erected not just to rent, but also to stress exclusivity. Yeah, I'll read it over here. Thank you.
Our next writer, Jenny Rasma, is a nursing professor at the University of Maine, Fort 10, and one of 5 women who was recently published in the anthology Compassionate Journey, Honoring Our Mothers' Stories. Please welcome Jenny Rasma.
Thank you. I'm going to read the first couple of pages from a book that I published a year ago. That was a real pleasure. My essay is titled The Essence of Mom. And the project was, all of us wrote about our mothers. Mom fell sometime during the night, Francis says on the phone. I'm on my way to the hospital. Given my mother's increasing frailties, this early morning call isn't exactly a surprise. Just the same, my My sister's news rattles me and makes me clumsy after we hang up. My hands tremble as I brush my teeth, and a sense of dread worms into the pit of my stomach. I think about my 87-year-old mother lying on the floor of her assisted living room for who knows how long. Despite my sister's repeated rehearsals with our mother to help her remember what to do in just this type of event, the pain and confusion from falling must have so disoriented her she never thought to depress the call button suspended from her neck. A fall is often the undoing of otherwise healthy elderly people, and my mother is no exception. She undergoes surgery later in the day to repair her fractured hip, and thereafter Frances updates me daily about what turns out to be a poor prognosis. On days my mother is alert enough, Frances holds the cell phone to Mom's ear. Her words are slurred, the residual of a stroke she suffered days after the surgical repair of her hip. Some 2 weeks into this ordeal, I hear her say in a dull, flat voice, difficult to comprehend as my mother's, "Jenny, when are you coming home?" She pronounces my name with a Dutch inflection. She often asks this question of me in anticipation of my next visit, but this time her question resonates as something deeper. She's weak and more vulnerable than ever before, and the reality sinks in that my mother is unlikely to regain the ground she lost from this cascade of events, that she will no longer be the person who asked me this same question only 4 months ago on New Year's Eve. That night, together with residents and visitors, we welcomed in the first few minutes of 2011. After singing Auld Lang Syne with everyone, Frances and I swallowed the last of our tea, then rose to put on our coats. Mom accompanied us to the foyer of her building. At the door, she leaned across her walker to kiss me. I hugged her in return and tried to impress everything about that moment in my memory. I took in her stooped back, gently strumming my hands along the washboard of her ribs beneath the sweater. I patted the short gray hair she curled with rollers every night, using the same sponge and bristle curler she had used for over 50 years. I breathed in her clean smell, heard her uplifted voice, saw the perpetual white tissue peeking out from where she had tucked it up her sleeve. I felt her velvety soft cheek against mine. The gold wedding ring she wore, her own and my father's, clinked together with the movement of hands now shrunken by age. The sparkle in her eyes, her visible happiness and contentment, I imprinted it all. As we say goodbye, Mom asked me, "When are you coming home? Then are you coming back?" She held my hands, and I told her I'd be home in late spring, less than 6 months away. I promised to call every day. These scenes race through my mind when I hear my mother, in the fog of dementia and post-operative pain medication, ask me on the phone, "When are you coming home, Jenny?" "As soon as I can, Mom." I am a college professor, and with only a few days left in the semester, I pack my things and make arrangements to be away for an extended period of time. I find someone to proctor my final exam, someone else to tend my home. On the first day of my journey by car, I cross the International Bridge spanning the shores of the St. John River from Maine to New Brunswick. I pull up to the customs office, where the officer on duty slides open the window and scans my packed Subaru. "Bonjour, où es-tu habite?" "Fort Kent," I say, handing her the American passport card I received a year ago after becoming a naturalized citizen. "Where are you headed?" she asks, switching to English. "Calgary," I answer. Her face registers surprise at my destination, some 6 provinces away. Then she asks, "What's the purpose of your trip?" It's my turn to stare. How do I answer her? Do I tell her my mother is dying? That I want desperately to be by her side, to hold her hand and stroke her remarkably soft skin? I want to hear once again the stories and family lore I assumed she'd be around to tell me for years to come. I want to tell the customs officer of my disappointment not to be granted just one more summer, to hear my mother talk to me in Frisian, her mother tongue, the language she passed on to her children, the taal in which she loved and scolded us, my sisters and me. Who else will call me Jenny? I thought for sure I'd have at least one more chance to feel her pat my knee and hear her say, "Lisa Scott, it's so good to be with you." But these are not the details the officer wants to hear. With a slight shake of my head, I regain my focus. Oh yes, the purpose of my visit. Vacation, I answer. After years of crossing the border, I know better than to give more information than asked.
afternoon is also our distinguished lecturer this evening. Ted Van Alst is Associate Professor and Director of Indigenous Nation Studies at Portland State University. He is co-editor and creative editor for Transmotion, an open access journal of postmodern Indigenous studies. His novel and stories about growing up in Chicago, Sacred Smokes, was published in 2018. Please help me welcome Ted Van Alst.
Hilarious. You have a beeping machine in there? Because there's going to be a lot of cussing. Right, what you know. So, wasn't in the email circle for this thing, so I'm not going to read from the book, because the book, it's got a hustle stickers, books on sale now, 1995. I'll read from tonight, but because it's shorter and we're doing the, write what you know, I wanted to do this story. So this story is a new story. I just sent it off to the Yellow Medicine Review. The editor called for stories and he goes, I don't give a shit what it's about, bonus points if it has a connection to Montana. I'm like, I can do that. So the story is called Cedar. The Montana, I gotta tell you about this story. So the first line, so I was driving to the res with my kids and it was like 3 o'clock in the morning in January in Montana. And it snows there like it snows here, right? So I wrote this first line, like I used to study for my classes driving up here from Bridgewater, while I was driving in this blinding snowstorm. But I came back about a year later and wrote the story that I wanted to write around. The Montana blizzard was a standard. The rolling, cartwheeling prison bus was not. Edgar had been drinking coffee and drifted through the whiteout storm, lulled into that autopilot mode by the hyper-speeding streaks on all sides and the deep blackness, their high contrast, rushing around his view, creating a soft and silent world of inevitability. 2 brake lights winked way ahead of him, lost red eyes in the monochrome chaos that fluttered, stayed on strong, and then suddenly whipped up 8 feet in the air and leered at him as they sank over the side of the embankment, tracers in the open space between the road and the blue-white field of snow 35 feet below. Even through the storm-dampened dark, he could hear screams and cries split the night wide open in ways that would never let it close for him the same again. They had been bouncing through the late afternoon magic light and now night for what seemed like hours, and even though they were in a bus and on the road and there were windows, still it was a prison transport. And every second was an hour, and every minute was a day. Tight and cold, he passed the time blowing smoke rings with the vapor left in his cramped lungs. They pushed back like the rest of his organs and everything else crammed down into the lowest profile possible from his soul and his too young face on down. At least Montana was a little more casual, not like a transport in Chicago. They didn't have leg irons here. Shit, they weren't even chained to the seats. But they jammed everyone in there, some dudes 3 to a seat. The cuffs were on a little too tight, though. That, he supposed, was to make up for the rest of the small freedoms. He looked through the unbarred windows and past his fellow inmates. Out there were fading buttes, valley floors crusted in ice and shining crystal, cows, trains, and the smell of snow he couldn't quite catch in here. Guys hacked and coughed, made small chit-chat, talked shit, scrounged for their bag lunches for scraps, got up to take leaks with permission, of course, a driver, 3 guards, and 44 inmates, including himself. He had joined them because of some outstanding warrants from some bullshit case in Chicago. He had did a burglary on some bro house by Loyola University on the north side. The judge gave him time served and he walked, but then the other 3 roommates pressed separate charges later and warrants got issued. 1 crib, 1 felony, he figured, so fuck that. But the law didn't see it that way. He had heard about the warrants from Caesar, this one cop they used to get coke from every now and again. Have you ever bought blow from a cop? That's the best shit you'll ever do. Ted thought about his current bullshit situation, how he had got locked up, some Montana Class A felony crap according to the tribal cops. Him and Petey just fucking around, and then Petey, drunk as he'd ever get in his miserable life, decided to hold up some shit liquor store in Billings. How he went along, and then after how they boogied over to the Crow Res and promptly got ratted out by some asshole goody two-shoes, probably a fancy dancer, this guy lived on his girlfriend's couch. Tribal cops showed up at this chick's house in that gray and rainy afternoon, teardrops from the otherwise impassive iron sky, the closest Teddy figured anyone would ever get to giving a shit about it. He smiled at the chick whose house it was as the cops dragged him to the squad car, and she top-toothed it back to him. Now, he was just pissed because the last female look he got came from a crow, and well, what the fuck. That and the outstanding warrants had fucked him over, and now here he was, because even though he wasn't Indian enough for enrollment, he was too Indian for state prison, and more than enough Lakota for these crow cops. So now he was on a bus, getting transferred from tribal jail and Crow Agency to Crossroads in Shelby, and then on to some federal shithole Lord knows where. He had finally resigned himself to do the time, or so he thought. Because now, looking back, he knew he wasn't ready. Shit, when all you own is time, you're never ready to part with it. He wondered if he got lucky, even as he tumbled through the air in this bus full of flying inmates and metal edges and screaming and blood and now some puke. Maybe being not ready was a way of praying, of letting Creator know that it wasn't going to work for you, that you needed help out of this situation. But that Creator humor said, well, I can't do that exactly, but I can give you this. And that's what he had to work with now. A flailing shit show of howling guards and inmates, glass and viscera flying around him, and time slowed to about 2,400 frames per second, and him fully aware of how much of it they had left, all while he moved at regular speed and worked to get his ass out of there, the single opportunity he figured for the once-in-a-lifetime shot he was going to get. The Blackfeet guy that had given him tons of shit died when his big face pushed up into the ceiling as they flew through space. He could see his nose drive up into his brain, and so he knew that was the end. The bus rolled into air, and that dude came down gray. Teddy saw his chance. He twisted and dove for the guy's neck, got a hand on that, and one under his chin, and then used his giant bucket of Nichols' head like a rock against the window, smashing it into the pane over and over again, even as the bus lurched in flight, one of its back wheels catching the edge of a boulder on the side of the embankment as it arced over once more. The heavy glass diamonded and split, webbing finer and finer, catching light from somewhere up on the road, and then it began to drop away. He felt kind of bad using the guy's skull and whatnot to break the glass, but not that bad. Shit. Who was the asshole talking about sue this and sue that, making jokes about old days captures and singing all those weird white dog songs? Not me. I'm just trying to eat a fucking sandwich and keep warm. This bitch had it coming. So Teddy gave a final shove at that big Blackfeet cranium, and out popped most of the window. Time slowed even more. The ice crystal air rushed to fill his lungs, slamming into his teeth and nose as he worked to throw the Blackfeet down between the seats, even as his feet pumped over his crumpling body to get to the gaping hole of light inside the dying bus. The screams rose and pressed in on his eardrums. He grabbed the sides of the broken window frames, glass shards digging unnoticed into his frantic palms as he launched himself into the blue and white quiet of the night, his body arching into the gravity-free space, birthed by a sudden drop in the bus's roll, its front end catching the last rocky outcrop before the canyon floor rushed up to silence the men inside. Teddy twisted through space, landing prone on his back in a 12-foot flat cedar, its fragrance embracing him as it broke his streak toward a rock pod 5 feet behind its moonlit shadow. He breathed heavy, felt his chest and stomach for impalements, wiggled his fingers and toes, and stretched his limbs, checking for breaks. Feeling nothing but the frozen air on his face, he reached deep in his left pocket, shackled hands digging for his cigarettes and lighter. He felt the branches under him, leaned his head way back, laughed, and lit a smoke. I like that story, man. That's a pretty good story. Plus, I hate crows and Blackfeet, so. I hope that editor is not a crow. I'm in trouble. Thanks.
here, and we also have Anthony Scott, Alice Boltridge, Jenny Wesmer, and Ted Farnell selling copies of the books in the back. And in 15 minutes, we'll come together again for a discussion panel with those 4 writers, answering questions on the theme, Writing What You Know.
Hear me if I don't shut the microphone? Yeah, okay. It's for you.
Hello.
I have a loud voice. So all our panelists are getting into place. Just wanted to say the t-shirt's too obnoxious for them, but it's not too obnoxious for me. I know you're all going to want one, but you're going to have to stick with us until we get next year's voices together, because this is obviously one of a kind. And so I want to thank you all for coming, and also thank our panelists for not only reading, but giving us time to talk about how they wrote. And I want to also thank the engine behind this whole thing. It's Melissa Lazad, who has kept us going and kept us on track, done a wonderful job of organizing and presenting each of the speakers. It's been great. Also, our planning committee, which is chaired by Melissa and Anthony Scott and Alice Bolstridge and Deb Hodgkins as well as me. So thank you so much, all of you, for taking that leadership. Just because I apparently am the institutional memory here of voices, I could just give you a little background. It was the brainchild of Catherine Pelletier, Allagash author, who, when she became famous, decided she would give back to the county. And she's done that in many ways, and Voices is one of the first things that she did, was she got this organization, this event organized for a 2-day conference, because she knew people all over the country. She not only brought Maine writers to Presque Isle, but she brought writers from all over the country for the Voices Conference, which was not only in 94 and 95, I mean 94 and 96, but 98 and 2000. So it was every 2 years for 4 years. And she was instrumental in starting that, and it got picked up and kept on going from year to year. So I'm just delighted to see Miss Melissa's initiative to make this happen again, so that when we come around next year, we may have a couple of days of workshops and panels. This is just a taste of what you're going to get. So this is a fairly simple format, and I'm hoping that you'll all participate with questions. But the theme of this event is Writing What You Know. So I've asked each of the panelists to talk a little bit about the process that they went through in presenting their work and how the writing process evolved, and how that demonstrates the theme, Writing What You Know. How does that exemplify that theme? So we'll start with that, and then maybe some follow-up, and then we'll open it up for questions and answers. So we'll start with, who wants to start? Let's do in the same.
I can start. I don't mind starting.
Okay, yeah.
Well, for me, my particular work, this particular work is poetry. And I have found that the different kinds of writing that I like to do, I kind of use them for different things. For instance, if I write fiction, that's like my own personal sandbox. It's like you put these characters in a situation and just have fun and see what happens, right? That's fiction. But when I write poetry, it's my way of trying to work something out. I've heard people give the advice, when something happens really big in your life, something important, heavy, whatever, usually it's heavy when I write poetry, whatever. I don't generally write a lot of happy poems, but there are a few, but most of the time it's like this heavy stuff. They say don't write about it while it's happening. You got to give it some time, you got to get some space to really, I'm sorry, it's just not my process. I was talking to Mr. Larry Burrs here just a few weeks ago, and I said, when I face hard times, it's through poetry that I write my way out of it. So for this particular work, I never set out to create a collection of poems called The Year Things Came Apart. I was just writing my way through things. And then, looking back a few years later, I realized, boy, I've got a lot of poems stacked up in that folder. I wonder if I could select some of them and they would fit underneath a theme. And I realized, well, yeah, a lot of them are dealing with this journey that we went through in my family. And so I began to collect them into the collection that's there on the table back there. So that was how I wrote what I know for this particular work.
Thank you, Anthony. So, full disclosure, my writing process always remains somewhat mysterious. When I was told that this was a theme of the symposium, I was a little nonplussed about what I was going to say, because it seems to me that every writing project has its own process. So what I say here is the best I can do as a literary theorist. That's one of my areas, literary theory, to construct a story of my process. Although I write what I know from memory, observation, or study, there's always some element of my subject that I do not know, that I'm searching for. So every writing project is an exploration of both what I know and what I don't know. Curiosity about what I don't know is my muse. That's my inspiration. For instance, in my poem, Covenant, it's a narrative of the event of driving through a rainbow. It's content that I know. I don't know what motivated me to risk speeding on a wet highway that I didn't know first time I drove that highway. And then to write about it. What did motivate me? So I explore what I know to discover what I don't know, which is finally expressed, I hope, in the ending of the poem, the Covenant poem. It's about moving from light through dark and then back into light again, and with all the metaphorical implications that brings to me. For me, Covenant is more about what I discover in the process of writing than about the event itself. But I can't get there without a detailed exploration of the event. I have a similar exploratory process in choosing form. Covenant began as a journal entry, taking the form of a simple prose narrative of what happened. As a poem, it turned out, after I don't know how many drafts, to be a sestina. That's a poetic form that follows a particular pattern. 6 stanzas of 6 lines each, and a coda at the end of 3 lines. Each line ends in a word that repeats in the following stanza in a particular pattern. I had studied and practiced the pattern in creative writing classes, and at some point in drafting the poem, I discovered that certain words were important enough to repeat for emphasis. In the process of working with the sestina form, I discovered new insights about the event itself, about the content of the poem, and about the meaning, what it meant to me, and about craft. I think everything I write, I learned something about writing. These discoveries are among the major pleasures of writing for me. I'm obsessed with the search for meaning that might remain elusive by the time I get done with it, and mysterious. I follow a similar exploratory process in composing a book, like Anthony said. I get a collection of poems, take a look at them, I start arranging, rearranging. I want to see if I can find some kind of pattern, a narrative maybe, or at least a theme. If I'm lucky, I can find both, at least for me. So my poems often get revised in collecting them into a book. And I had to print out poems that I read today because in the process of preparing for this day, I found myself revising again. So I figure if Walt Whitman can do that, write one book all his life, which he keeps revising, so can I. So for me, every writing project, whether it's prose or poetry, is exploring what I know through memories, observations, and imagination to discover what I don't know. The role of imagination is also important, but I better leave that for another time because I'm running out of time.
For me, writing what I know, it starts with a prompt, and I think because I'm a latecomer to creative writing, and I started probably 13 years ago. I was on a sabbatical leave in Western Canada, in Edmonton, and I thought, oh, I've got time on my hand, I'll take a creative writing class, and that's what got me started. And so there were great prompts, and so consequently I try to attend 2 or 3 writing workshops a year, just because that's where I get a lot of energy, I get a lot of ideas, a lot of prompts. But I think the other thing with that, I stay attuned as well. When I'm listening to the radio and I hear, a discussion, all of a sudden something out of that discussion may leap up, and then it's like an idea as well that I can then start writing on. So I actually wrote an essay about my father when, based on that, just a couple of years ago, about his World War II experience. And so the other thing is, I find when I go to writing workshops, I really like when the instructors give you time to do free write, 10-15 minutes to do free write, those who want to read what they've written, that works. And I always find that really useful because it helps clear your head, gets whatever sort of buzz is going on in your head onto the paper, and then you're sort of ready to start writing. But I find when I'm at home on my own writing, I just go directly, turn on the computer, and start writing. I'll start with an idea, start with a sentence, then the sentence becomes a paragraph, the paragraph becomes a page. Then when I leave it, because it's time for bed or time for work, and come back to it, I always start from the beginning. And I know people say, no, you have to just carry on. But for me, I always start from the beginning, read it, and I edit, I refine, etc. So as the piece gets longer, it takes me longer to get to the end of it. But by the time I'm done, I feel like I have a reasonably polished essay. But that said, I know exactly what you're saying about going back to it even 2, 3, however many years, and you think, oh my gosh, I want to change this, I want to change that. So yeah, I think somebody once said that writing is like putting up wallpaper, you're never done.
Just want to say to my students here in the front, she said free writing is closely connected to pre-writing. It's true.
Can confirm. If I teach writing, I'm teaching writing. I teach a bunch of different subjects, but if I'm teaching writing, I tell my students that it's really important. Because you're no matter what the purpose of your writing is, you have to kind of respect it, and that potentially you could be creating art in the coming moments. So you should really think about it in that way. And so, like a painter will, a sculptor will, any artist will, they'll sketch things out, right? That's a way to work through the process. But as writers, as creative artists in the writing field, I tell my students, I'm like, usually I said, let's look at your papers, right? See that first paragraph, the one with all the red writing all over it? It's crap, right? That was the hardest paragraph to write. This stuff in the middle is kind of flowing pretty good, and then you choke again at the end because you're trying to reiterate the part at the beginning that you never got right in the first place. So what you really need to do before you write is make a grocery list, make a list of all the people who did you dirty in 3rd grade that you still hate, whatever it is, right? Your favorite ice creams, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Just write and get that out of your system before you start writing the thing that you're going to write. Because you really need to eject a whole lot of crap in the frontal cortex. It's just like kind of swimming around, and it's fixing to get in your way, right? So go back and look at papers and look at where all the marks are at. They're in those first paragraphs because you're just kind of winging that shit, let's be real. So get that out of your system, right? And then begin with the writing. So for me, that impulse to art is really important to me. Craft is the thing that you're doing consciously, but you're subconsciously working towards. You know, I think about this when I think about music, right? You get a 2.5-minute song, you're like, that's excellent. These lines are fucking dope. Look at this, right? Try writing 250 pages of where everything is dope, right? It's really hard. It's really hard. So I figure musicians sometimes got it easier and harder at the same time. So in the book, you're trying to do that thing, and you're crafting, you're very conscious of what you do, and if you do it right, all of a sudden art pops out, you're like, holy shit. You know when you go back and you read your writing, you're like, I wrote that. I wrote that. I don't even really remember writing that. That's art. That's the good stuff, right? And so the whole reason I'm writing is to get to the good stuff all the time. Sometimes you get on a roll, it's plenty art. Sometimes you just go to bed, because this day is not working out for you, right? This is really crap. So think about what you're doing, be conscious of it, and do this pre-write, free-write, whatever it happens to be, so that you get to the thing that you really want to do, whether it's poetry or it's fiction or whatever. And so in the writing what you know, I'm a pretty decent storyteller. I can tell a good story. My grandpa was a great storyteller before he had a stroke, and then that was how he kind of recovered, right? He had like 3 strokes, but he was such a good storyteller that remembering, like, relearning language and stuff, he did it via recalling these stories that he knew, you know, and so that storytelling saved him that way, brought his mind back for him. So for me, I would tell these stories, and then I'd be at these conferences. I'm a nerd, I have a PhD in comp lit, I'm literary theory, I'm like write the dry academic, like dry as popcorn fart academic. And then I would tell these stories that come in all my, you know, mostly my Ojibwe bros are like, yeah, man, you gotta write this stuff down. You really need to write these stories down. And my long-suffering wife was like, just write these stories down. So I started writing them down. People were like, you should send those stories out, you know? So I started to send some stories out. People were like, bam, they published them. And I'm like, okay, but you know what? That story has been marinating for 40 years in the back of my mind. So I know exactly how to best tell that story. So by the time I got around to writing it down, it had gone through a whole lot of internal editing. So, but writing what you know, if you write it well enough and you think it's too specific, if you write it well enough, it becomes universal. It doesn't matter that it happened in Washburn, right? It doesn't matter that it happened in Bridgewater. If it's done and done well, then it might as well happen in Salinas, California. It doesn't really matter. It could be anywhere. So write the thing that you know best, right? And trust yourself to make it matter to other people. As long as it matters to you, right? Then you can move on from there. I think that's really important. And so writing what you know, I think doesn't mean just the place where you live, but like what you know here too, right? And be honest with your writing yourself. I think it really can make a difference.
I hope you had the same experience that I did. Something each person said resonated with me. Is that true for you who are writing? You know, revision is a constant process. Poor Jenny knows that. She's reading essays I wrote 30 years ago, and I'm still revising them. And I'm sending her revisions of the revisions. And throw away, I mean, as an editor, we get these submissions from writers, and the first paragraph was a throwaway.
Yep.
You just said, cut it out. You start the story. Somewhere buried in there is your lead. Yeah, so, and your comments too as well. It's just all of those things resonate. So I have a couple of questions before I open it up. One is, probably there's at least half these people who would like to see their writing published. So each of you tell us the first thing about, you know, how you first got published, not once you've been successful, but your first experiences. We can just pass it right straight back.
I mean, submittable. Go online. There are tons of places that are constantly accepting submissions. Also, don't pay to submit your writing. Do not pay to submit your writing. There are plenty of places, undergrad, grad journals, magazines, that will read your writing for you, right? You submit to them. Sometimes you get paid, sometimes you don't. It doesn't matter when you first start out, whether you get paid or not. The story that I just sent off, that I just read, the Yellow Medicine Review, I'm not getting paid for that. I don't care. It's a good story, I like it, I want other people to read it. So what? It doesn't matter to me, right? But places that, well, we have to charge $20 for it. don't do it. Don't do it. Don't do it. Don't do it. Right? Just don't pay to submit places. But there are a ton of journals. If you go to Submittable, you just put in submit stories, Google. You will get a ton of places. And then you can scroll down, like I write humor, I write memoir, I write poetry, whatever it happens to be, and start submitting. And those slush piles, it's hard to break through, and you'll get tons of rejections. I just got a rejection the other day, whatever. But for every 15 rejections you get, 20, you get an acceptance. And there's nothing like going through a slush pile and getting that acceptance. Then after a while, people will call you, hey, can you write for me, whatever, and then you can pick and choose your stuff. But start off that way, and if you do it good, you'll get some feedback, but you'll also develop what writers need, which is a pretty thick skin, right? Because we're putting it out there, baby, and fiction don't lie. So you're telling real truths to the world, and people are like, I don't care, right? That hurts. Like, what do you mean you don't care, man? Work really hard on that story. You got to develop a little bit of a thick skin, and submitting over and over and getting rejections. I'm not saying that's the greatest thing, but eventually when you get that take that first acceptance and frame that. I don't care if you're getting paid for it or not, but just know that you reached somebody else, an editor who was like, oh yeah, that's a big deal, right? So keep submitting, get it out there, and don't pay to publish.
Since we're starting off with things that you should never have to do, even if you see a publisher asking you to do it. For a long time, I would submit. By the way, it's a numbers game, right? If you're writing what you know, and you're writing what you're passionate about, and you know it's good stuff, then you know if you keep sending it out, eventually someone's going to like it, right? So it is a numbers game, and you're going to get more rejections than you are acceptances. But Stephen King, before he framed his first acceptance, he had this nail through a rafter in the attic where he had his little office set up, and he proudly compiled how many rejection slips he had gotten on that nail. And that was his thing that he was proud of, because he saw he was putting in the work and he knew it was a numbers game, and then finally it started hitting for him, right? But the thing that publishers, you may see some, and not all of them ask for it anymore, online or otherwise, but some of them still do, but there are so many different journals and places to get published out there nowadays that you don't have to abide by this anymore. Because if you do abide by it, and I hadn't told you yet, I'm doing that on purpose, I'm just holding you there and talking, all right? But anyway, if you do pay attention to this, then you'll have this piece that you know, oh, it's good, it's vibrant, I want to get it out there, but you're not getting it out there because you're held hostage by this one little piece of a requirement that the publisher has said. No simultaneous submissions. Bullshit.
Fingers crossed. I didn't do it.
There are so many out there. If some little, anthology out in the middle of the Midwest somewhere gets mad because you sent them a letter, sorry, this has been published by someone else, and they never want to see your stuff again, so what? There are thousands out there. They're hurting you. You're not.
That's right.
I mean, because I don't know about you. I write. But I don't write so many that I just have 1,000 backlog pieces that I can just keep sending out. No, if I have enough people tell me that I can't send it out for until I hear back from them, and then they wait 6 months or more to tell me whether or not they've accepted it, man, you might never get that piece published. So, yeah, it's just unreasonable. Ignore that no simultaneous submission. Send it to 50 if you want to. And then, do the courteous thing. Keep track of who you sent to, and when someone accepts it, sorry. And if they blackball you after that, that's okay. There's 5,000 more somewhere else. Yeah.
So I mentioned that, back in 2006, I took a writing workshop, and that's when I started writing Memoir. And in that workshop, I wrote an essay, Crossing the Border, and about my experience. I mean, I came from, the middle of Alberta. I didn't know what it was like to cross the border. Anyway, that essay ended up getting finished, and Kathy published it in Echoes. So that was fun. So Echoes doesn't exist anymore. But what I would recommend, there's one, if any of you are familiar with the magazine The Sun, the centerpiece in it is Readers Write, and they have writing prompts. So it used to be 6 months, now they do just 2 months. and you submit a brief, I don't know, 150, 250 words on whatever the prompt is. And really, I've been reading The Sun for many years, but that's the first section I still go to. And I have submitted a few things there and had it published in there as well. So it's a really good way as well, just to see what other people are writing, how they're thinking, but also, you know, just the variety of experiences that people have on a single theme or a single prompt. It's really fascinating. So that would be, in terms of getting, you know, looking to get published, is that I recommend that one.
So, in the 1980s, I was in Oklahoma studying for a PhD. I have to make a living, and so I thought I'd be an academic. And I also was beginning to write poetry some. So I took a poetry writing class, and I also took a fiction writing class. And the second, in the first 2 years I was there, at the end of the second year, a fiction writing teacher says, Alice, you haven't submitted to the contest yet, the English department contest. And I said, huh? And he told me to, and so I did, in all three genres that they were given prizes: poetry, fiction, and essay, academic essay. I won all three, which really spoiled me for all the rejection. They were published. The poem and the story were published. The essay wasn't published. But so that's my experience. I'd say, you know, publish locally. Start locally. Start where you're at, and that's what I did. I started where I was at, and I still, you know, send around to local when I can. And I don't, Anthony's story reminded me of a book I read recently about, written by an academic who, in psychology it was, and she was talking about it was a memoir, and she was talking about her first academic writing, where she, she'd been advised to submit 40 different journals, and you'll likely get one accepted. So that's academic writing, but I think it's also true of other things. I've never done that. I've never been able to keep up to that kind of submission. It takes work. You have to research the magazine or the publisher and find out what they want, and I've never been very good at submitting more than one at a time, but I try.
I have a big confession to make. I'm so sorry, I don't believe I did this. But I gave you the names of the planning committee, and I left Rachel Rice off of my list. And she was, of course, the pivotal person as well as Melissa. So anyway, sorry, Rachel. Sorry. And if, I know you're referring to a book by Stephen King, and if you're writers and have not read the book On Writing,
That's the one.
by Stephen King, read it. It's
And
a must.
reread it.
I've read it at least 3 times. On Writing by Stephen King, and it's autobiographical as well as a toolkit for writers. And I also identify with your writing out your problems. I hope nobody reads my journals after I die, because I think I lived a life of depression.
Right.
And I'm really a happy person, but when I'm not happy, I write. So, okay, I have another question. If you had one thing to tell these people as good advice for writing, what advice would you give them? Oh, well, you can pass it on if you want to think about it.
I'll let you go first, man. Yeah.
Write the stories that you want to read. I mean, really, it's that simple. I wrote the book because nobody's writing that. Nobody's writing for my kid, for my, my people, my folks. Nobody's writing those stories. And I mean, I'm not the first person to say that, but if you don't see that book in the world, who was that? That wrote was it Toni Morrison? If you don't see the book in the world that you want to read, then you write it. And I think really, just like cooking, don't eat food that you wouldn't eat, right? Don't make food that you wouldn't eat. Don't write stories that you wouldn't read, right? I mean, really, it's about honesty and authenticity. Yeah, you can work through some things. You can do all of those things. Whenever you're writing, I think you're engaging in a deeper part of yourself, and you are putting pieces of yourself out there for a variety of reasons, but really make that count, make that real, and write the things that you want to read. If you want to write and you just do your journal, right? That's not for everybody. That's great. Write that because you want to read that. But if you're putting stories out in the world, man, you better be true to the craft and to the art and put the stuff out there that you would want to read, that you would want to pick up and go, dang, this person did the work. Right? I appreciate that. That's what I would say.
Personally, I think it's helpful if whatever you're writing, it starts with a spark, something that hits me, something that just jumps out and grabs me. Maybe it's a real moment, maybe it's an idea, but it's something that I feel a lot of energy from. Because writing is, eventually you're going to hit that point when it's work. Okay? So if you started off feeling like it's work, you're probably not going to finish. Your imagination's going to wander. It's going to be just right. But now maybe you're sitting there saying, "Well, I don't have that many things happen to me in a day or a week's time that are sparky." But you just wake up. There's stuff happening all around you and to you, and anything that's striking you, And I find something. I'll go to the page and I'll let that right brain take off. Let that right brain take off. I'm just right. And it'll go all kinds of weird places. But buried in that is some stuff that's worth keeping. And I might find when I lift that out, oh, that would make a really cool poem. Oh, that would make a really great short story. Oh, maybe I need to put that to music, right? But yeah. So start paying attention. Those things that are hitting you every day, those are moments. Those are possibilities. And go put that on paper. And you do that enough times, eventually one of them turns into something.
I think it's also really important to surround yourself, if you can, or surround yourself with people who also enjoy the craft of writing. So when my wonderful, magical sabbatical year, when I came back, a friend of mine in Fort Kent who liked writing and was very good at it said, "Jenny, why don't we write together?" So every Saturday morning, we got together. She came to my place at about 8 o'clock in the morning. She named us WW42, Writers Workshop 42, and we held together for 10 years, and on Saturday mornings, and most Saturdays anyway. And she moved 3 years ago to go downstate, and neither of us has been writing much. And I will say that of what we did, and we often just, we randomly pick a prompts, and sometimes from the reader's right, whatever, wherever we got them from. And sometimes it was just, like you say, it was just practice. Other times, there was a kernel in what we had written, and it became an essay, and it became published. It became certainly a finished essay and sometimes published. So I think there's real merit in surrounding yourself with people who are also committed to the craft, and I think that's incredibly important. You don't want to get into a writing group where you're wasting your time. So this is somebody, be with other people who can give you honest feedback and provide you with the support you need. And I think what I learned from that as well is that there's an energy with writing, but we derive an energy from others with whom we write as well. So I think that that's really valuable.
Read a lot.
Amen.
Read in the area that you're interested in writing, and pay attention to how they do it. And practice and experiment with what you see your favorite writers doing. I think of Mr. Rogers in terms of what you should do. Find the helpers. Find the people who can help you, the teachers, the writing groups. encourage your writing. It's easier to find critics than to find people who are going to be encouraging. And I think it's really important to find people who can encourage you. And experiment, explore. Don't be afraid to write what you don't know. If it's something you want to know, explore it. I think that's about all I have to say about that one.
I want to underscore something you said.
I thought you were going to go a different place when you said, don't be afraid to write. So I want to finish this sentence a different way too. Add to that, don't be afraid to write what would make your mom or your preacher blush.
We know that you did that. No, I heard you say twice, you write about what you don't know as well as what you do know. And I don't know about you, but sometimes I'll start out and I think I know what I'm going to write, and I learn something that it ends up completely different, and I've learned so much from the writing process. So don't feel you have to know what your end is going to be, because it's probably going to be a discovery process. So, okay, I want to bring it back around now to the readings that you did this morning or this afternoon, earlier this afternoon, and just each one say one thing about what you read, and that would be what you would like the reader, and we're looking at you all as readers now, what would you like the reader to take away from the piece that you read this morning? And then we'll open it up.
I talked about the process, and I think hopefully you understood what I was saying. If I didn't, I failed, by the way, as a writer. So what I would want you to take from it is that I lost it. I had something as you were talking too. So Alice, I'm handing it to you.
What would I want you to take away from what I read? If you were in my creative writing class, what I would teach you is in a poetry writing class, and I have taught creative writing and poetry writing. I would teach you the sestina form. I would teach you the sonnet form. I would teach you all of the forms in the English language. Not because I expect you to write in form necessarily, but you can learn a lot about poetry writing even if you're writing free verse. So I wouldn't necessarily want you to take that away today because it's not time enough. Just the idea that it takes a lot of practice and exploration and experimentation to learn to write well.
That's a tough question, Kathy. But I think what I would say is maybe about this project of the book, that it was written by 5 women, and so there was no single person acted as an editor. We all had equal contribution to it. And as I was putting my thoughts together for today, that African saying, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And I probably could have written my essay a lot faster by myself. Working with a group of people took a lot longer. There's a whole process of, sorting, of coming together, having meetings, deciding what you're going to do, etc. But it ended up getting published. And had I been on my own, the essay probably would have been done, maybe sooner than what it took, because this project took about 5 years, I think, from the sort of the inception of the idea to actual publication. But I think that essay would still be on my hard drive of my computer, and I don't think it would have seen the light of day in terms of a bound copy. So I think, surrounding yourself with other people is really, really valuable, or other writers, I guess.
couple of weeks ago, I was talking to someone who took my creative writing class last year, someone who didn't think that they would like or be interested in writing poetry. And we were all going through something. And I told her, I said, but now you have a tool to work through this, don't you? If I want to say anything about writing and the project I did today is I hope you take away the fact that writing is self-empowering. You have no control necessarily over what life is going to hand you, but man, in that moment, you begin to shape it. You can take some control of that and make it into something. And yet it's still a process of discovery too, but writing, it's therapeutic for me. It's like turning life into something amazing, beautiful, cool, catchy, awesome, fun. Yeah, it's empowering. It's a way to really come to grips and understand you as well as the world better. Yeah.
What did you take away? What did you take away? What was the question you asked me?
Where do you get... The best blow comes from a cop.
That's right. The best cocaine comes from the people who confiscate only the finest. And besides that, what I think was, I mean, the book itself, a lot of people have remarked on the importance of the book, and you know, the awards from World Class Studies Association, places like that, is that all of us, no matter what class we come from or whoever, we all have stories to tell. You know, we all have things that are really important in the world, that you shouldn't overlook somebody just because of where they went to school, or didn't go to school, or where they live, or where they're from. But I think the takeaway that I wanted from the story today is that from the time that you're in the car and you see the brake lights ahead of you to when he lands in the tree, the entire bulk of the story takes place in about 3.5 seconds, right? So that you have a 7-page story that is actually taking place and done, right? So think about condensing time and think about what you can do as a writer. You can control time, you can control space, atmosphere, the weather, all of those things. When you talk about writing being self-empowering, it really is, because you're creating the world. So anything that you want to have happen in that world, as long as you allow for the mechanics, you can do it, right? So just know that, and then if you're ever like, say you can't get the best blow in the world because the cops aren't around, and you're bored, and you want to write a story, just know that you can create that entire world, right? And that's a way to pass, even just to pass the time.
We'll add to that the ability to elaborate on detail, and that's what I took away, is just about all the detail, and yours too. I mean, your mother's soft face, your accent.
Every sense.
You painted the picture so that we could feel, we could sense, and we could see, and that there's just all this imagery going around. Okay, I'm going to stop talking now and open it up to you all. And if you speak softly, I will give you the mic. Do you speak softly, Jim?
No. In your own world, what does poetry mean to each one of you? What's your feeling? Why is poetry important?
I'll go, since I read poetry.
My son, bless his little heart, told me he wanted to be a writer. Love that boy. I had just finished the acknowledgments for this book, A Novel and Stories. And he said, I want to be a writer, who should I read? So we went to the bookstore. I'm going to tell this story later, so if you're here later, you'll hear about it later. But I had to go back, because the first books I gave him were Jim Carroll and Charles Bukowski, and I was like, poetry. Poetry, to me, is really important, because there are, excuse me, thousands of poets in the world. There are like a dozen good ones. Everybody thinks they can write poetry, but it's really, really hard, right? And so for me, when I write prose, what I appreciate most about poetry is the consideration of the word, the weight that goes into the word. And when I write fiction, I want to give that same kind of weight to the word. Sometimes there's filler words and you got to move the story forward, but how do those words work together? How do those words sound together? You know, sometimes maybe that's not grammatically the right word, but it works for me because it sounds right. It does what I need it to do within a sentence. So if you read the book, you'll see all kinds of offsets, I have really grammar because I'm about breath and I'm about voice and all those things I picked up from poetry. I have no pretensions to being a poet, but poetry is essential art and language, man. Poetry is like everything to me, so.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I heard someone.
He said it so much better than I did.
I heard someone describe, they were talking about Tai Chi. And they said that Tai Chi is the martial art that's, it's like, imagine you have a piece of wood, but it was dark, and you explore that piece of wood slowly with your hands to get to know it. Well, Tai Chi is the martial art by which you explore your own body and weight through movement, and you really learn through this slow, drawn-out movement how you work. Poetry is like the Tai Chi of literature. Yeah.
Nice.
I have to say that I'm not naturally drawn to poetry, but that said, I travel a lot in my car, and I love it on Fridays when I am listening to Maine Public, and I can't remember what program it is, but you know, when they read the poetry out loud, the Maine poets, and I just love how some of those poems just grab you and you're absolutely breathless. I mean, it's, you know, a few verses, maybe a single verse, whatever, and how an entire story is told or can bring you to such emotion in such a short space with such few words. I mean, that's was what amazes me. So I've never tried to write my hand in poetry because I don't think I could ever accomplish that. But I certainly appreciate it when I read it or hear it.
So I think the question is, why poetry, right? I write and am published on all three genres, poetry, fiction, and nonfiction. And when I have to work so hard, why in the world do I bother with the poetry? And I have more poems published, and I have one more award in poetry than the other genres. And it's because I can say in poetry what I can't say in fiction or nonfiction. When I get to a point, and it's kind of hard for me to say what the emotional depths are that lead me to write. It is what's the saying? Too deep for words. When what I want to write is too deep for words, I think that's when I turn to poetry, because it works for me better to say what I want to say when I can't say it. A narrative, fictional narrative, or narrative about things that happen, memoir.
Thank you.
You just wrote that down, didn't you? Too deep for words, you can't. I have to write everything down. I have nothing to say if I haven't written it.
Was there a moment in your life where you discovered that you wanted to write, like, you would like to write as a career, or you would, like, you know?
Or a hobby.
What?
Or a hobby.
Or a hobby, yeah.
Are you fixated on the career part of that, or are you saying just you want to write your whole life?
Just like you want to write, not necessarily a career. Like.
Yeah, because career suggests I'm going to make money off of this, right? And it's generally not advisable to be a writer if you want to make lots of money. There are a few who do it, but yeah, when you realize you want to write and you want to do that, you want to be able to call yourself a writer, right? For me, the moment was I had been doing it as a part of my previous profession. You know, we always had to prepare thoughts to preach every Sunday, right? And so I had been doing it, and I had started enjoying crafting the words. I'd gotten a little bit bored, I think, in hindsight now, with the actual beliefs in the liturgy and all the dogma and stuff. But I started enjoying the crafting the words and being able to put those together interesting ways that elicited responses. I don't know how that ties in with religious faith or not. I was manipulating an audience. I don't know, but anyway, but I realized I enjoyed that, and I didn't think much about it. Then I came here to school, and I started really getting some great feedback from professors, Melissa Crow and Mr. Zuris and Professor Rice, who's now President Rice. And I was like, hey, I like doing this. People seem to like it when I do it, so I think I want to do it. And I switched my major from education. By the way, I'm teaching at a high school now, but I switched my major away from education and became just a pure English writing major. Yeah.
Wow, I don't. Are you a writer? When do you become a writer? I think always. I remember getting in trouble when I was like 4 for writing on the wall. And I've always been a reader. I don't remember not being able to know how to read. And we lost babysitters when I was a kid. I was like 3, and my mom told me, she came home and the babysitter was like, I'm not watching Dick anymore. And she was like, why not? She said, because he's reading the paper. She said, well, he reads the paper every day. She goes, yeah, but he's not like pointing at us. He's like reading the stories to me. I can't deal with it. So I've always been a reader and always been a writer. And so I used to write before I had a GED. I'm a high school dropout. I have a PhD and a GED. So I used to write, and I would read my stuff like in punk rock clubs in Chicago. And that's where I would do my reading and stuff. And people were like, yeah, you're a pretty good writer, man, I like your stuff. And then I came here, and Ray fixed my writing for me. Then I sent my stuff back, my friends were like, holy shit, you can write, you are a writer. And so I think at that moment, it was like, you gotta break that horse a little bit, you get a little education, you get a little training, you can actually do a lot with it. And I think at that point, even though I went into academia, the writing part was always there. But to be honest with you, man, I didn't start writing in published. I was an old man. I published my first story, I think it was in the Yale Medicine Review, and got a pushcart nomination at 50. I was 50. So I've got 45 years of reading and writing behind that. But you just decide that that's what you want to do, and I think what are you going to leave for your family, for your kids, you got to have something that you're good at, whether it's being a good family person or being a painter or whatever it is. For me, it was just writing. I was like, I can do that. Creator's like, I'll give you a couple things. You're not going to be good looking, so you're going to be funny, so you get a good looking life. You tell good stories. I'll look out for you there. I'm going to give you a big mouth, and you're going to be a good writer. You'll be able to share. So that's the things I got. Once I kind of realized that, ooh, I'm in good shape now. So, yeah, always kind of knew it, but never really realized it until much later in life.
Well, I've always been a reader as well, and I've always liked language, just how language can evoke such imagery and such emotion. So as I say, I was late coming into writing, but I remember that first year when I started into it, having a hard time pulling myself away from the computer because I was so into it, and having to go to work the next day was an interference. So that was, and that still is such a good feeling to know that, oh my gosh, I've just got something burning in me that wants to be written down.
There was no one moment. It was a very gradual kind of awakening. I was asleep during a big part of my life, actually. Lost in fantasy, fairy tales, and nursery rhymes. I came to appreciate, actually, the fairy tales and nursery rhymes when I started writing. In my 40s, I started writing seriously. And it was mostly at the encouragement of teachers. They assign you something to write, and you have to write it. And there's a lot of agony for me. Agony mostly about exposure. My God. But, so eventually I came to it. I still feel, a lot of self-consciousness at times about things that I write. But at times, it gradually developed into a compulsion, I guess I have to say. And I have to write every day, even though I don't necessarily write a poem, work on a piece of fiction or nonfiction. So.
Okay, leave the microphone there. Anybody else? Yes, go ahead.
I know we're talking about writing what you know, but anything that I start writing, it's like Alice said, you find out things that you don't know. So how much research do you have to do into things that you don't know to make it so that it's still, credible or whatever? I mean, if you're writing about someone going to a therapist, I've never been to a therapist. I probably should, maybe, but how do you make that realistic and not, just sound phony?
And don't feel like you all have to respond if you don't want to. You can pass it around. If it strikes you, fine. If you don't, fine. That's fine too.
Whoops. Basic question again.
How much?
Oh, how much research?
Thing that you don't know, yeah. How much?
I say research. I research until I am satisfied that I can at least get started. Inspiration comes during the process of researching, and I don't really know how to tell when I'm done researching, especially with my nonfiction. I do an awful lot of research. That's another one of my compulsions, I want to be sure I'm right, which I often find wrong, but so I think it's very much an intuitive process for me to know when I've done enough. I'm not sure I ever know that.
I'm writing a lot about my parents, and my parents spent the first 25, 30 years of their life in the Netherlands, and they lived through the Second World War. And so I know their stories, and I know, other than what a few things you read, but then to actually find out what was actually going on in the Netherlands. I went back and done some reading. My parents came with a faith and with a church, and it's the same thing. You think you know it until you start writing it, and you think, oh, well, what was the theology, right? What were all those arguments over, that kind of stuff. So yeah, having to go back and find. So I've tried to find as many books as I can written by other people from that era, from that time span, or who were immigrants themselves from the Netherlands, or from that church background. So yeah, I think it's always a matter of, even as much as you think you know, there's always a backstory that you have to be able to fill in. Because otherwise what you have is just like a cave, the form, but not with the substance. So I think that's really what's important to put in there. Yeah.
I want to differentiate between what I consider two different purposes or types of research. One of the things that's been said and reiterated here today is always be reading. And you may not have a specific project in mind while you're reading, but that's part of your research, right? Because everything you're putting in becomes material that you can then come through your pen in a fluid, natural way, right? So you're always researching technically, hopefully. Good readers are good writers are good readers. But then there's also research that I might do specific for a project. If I'm writing a poem, if I'm writing a short story, usually those ideas come kind of natural and I just flow with them. I may not do any research specifically for those. But often, in the process of writing them, especially a short story, I'll bump into something, realize, oh, I need to know more about that. And then I'll do my research, right? For a larger project, like my novel, I had this idea, this crazy idea. I knew where I wanted it set, but I'd never lived in that particular setting. So I started doing research. I started good online. This is before the project ever started taking form. And I did lots and lots of research. I took a vacation and went down to that part of the nation and spent some time there looking over the ground. I went and took another trip. I interviewed some local senior citizens, played some music for them. That's the way I got them to let me come. Is I'll entertain you if you'll give me information, right? So yeah, and I spent money and time and went places and went to resources and went to libraries before I ever started writing. Now, once I had that big overhead of all that data and information, and I started writing, I didn't keep it on my desk. I put that somewhere in a file cabinet where I couldn't see it. Because I didn't want it to choke me up with me thinking, well, I better get that fact right. No, that's not the way your right brain will choke if your left brain's constantly saying you better be right and accurate, for me. So I put that somewhere. If I've stored that and I've really built up a good store of all that data, a lot of that will start coming through naturally, and if it gets wrong in the first draft, who cares? I'm going to revise this thing 90 times anyway. Then my left brain can come out. I'll let the editor out of the closet then, and then we can check our facts. But roughly, because I've already got a sense of it, and I've done all that reading and research, it starts just coming naturally. So.
I think, research is really important. The story that I read, I had to research. I didn't know the name of the town where they transferred people from a tribal jail to the federal prison, and that the capacity of a bus was 48. That's why there's 44 prisoners, 3 guards, and a driver. I had to look up the specific. That's a weird thing to Google. But, give me the dimensions and the specs on a prison bus. So your FBI agents just, I think so, I have a novel in stories, I write short stories, right? So I was like, I'm gonna do a Southern Gothic, right? But I purposefully decided to do something that I don't normally do. And so I started writing this story, and I was going to do a short story, and it just went novella. I just had 19,000 words this past weekend, because when you're writing, characters come alive, and writing is acting. And so I have these characters, and all of a sudden they start telling me their story, and I'm just taking notes. We're just flying shit. They're just doing all the talking. But what I was going to say about the research is I always kind of keep a window open. So this is a story, it's set in the Carolinas, it's set in the Sea Islands off of South Carolina. Most of the people in the story are Gullah people. I speak Gullah, that's where I studied my master's language is down that way. And there are 3 women, 1 older sister, 2 younger sisters, and 2 younger sisters don't give a shit if I die, my main character dies. But I don't know why, right? So I'm trying to trace back the ancestry of the oldest sister because they're Gullah people. I looked up Mende and Twi tribal structures in Sierra Leone. So I see that if the older sister perishes, then the next youngest sister, she becomes the leader of the home, and I'm like, there it is, right? So then now I have motivation just from doing the research, because I want to make sure that I get the tribal structures right, out of Sierra Leone, and it actually gives the missing motivation that I had for a sub-character. So I think a lot of times that research is really important. Think about how good Jurassic Park is, right? Because Crichton did the research, right? Stephen King does the research. That's really important. You can have a great story, you can have a great premise, but that research, right? What is it, the Langoliers that he wrote about Presque Isle? He had to research the weather in Presque Isle. He had to know these kind of things. And it seems like a tiny part of the story, but that's huge. Because remember, we're talking about mechanics. If the physics don't work, like in a video game, like if you could just walk off the side of a building and you don't die, who cares? That's not a good video game, right? So if the mechanics aren't working, then your story is clunky. Whenever you're writing, you make a contract with the reader. I'm going to build this world, and it's going to have all of these things that work together. There's a logic to the world. And if you violate it, the story fails. So research is hugely, hugely important, no matter what the genre is, or fiction or whatever. And I think the poets would agree that sometimes you want to write about a certain thing, you haven't been there, or you don't know that, or you don't know the angle of the sun in the sky in March in Gallup, Mexico. You can Google that and go, okay, that makes sense. I can write this line. So research is really, really important.
How many of you, raise your hand, have a question that you want to ask? Because we're down to the end.
So I have something I want to say.
Oh.
You haven't asked that. Anybody who wants to say something? May I? Okay. I was a teacher for many years. The highest I ever taught was 7th grade. But I know that I ran into a lot of teachers who were not supportive. There are not always Anthony Scotts. There are not always whoever this gentleman is. Alice Oldridge can't be in your class all the time. You're gonna run into people who are not supportive. Don't let them get in your way. Know in your heart that you have something to write, and just go with it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very much. If you do have a question, I would suggest you write it down, and if it's for a specific person, find them and give it to them. I'm sure they would be happy to get back to you. Be sure to put your contact information down. If you have a question that you haven't asked and you're being shy, feel free to write it down and give it to one of the panelists, or give it to me. Say who it's for. I don't think we could have chosen a better group of people to talk about writing today, and I want you to tell them that with your applause. We took away not only facts and experiences and information, but just the spirit of what you do and how you do it, and I thank you very much. That was great. I hope you're all coming back to hear our speaker tonight. 7 o'clock will be the distinguished lecture with Mr. Van Alst. So,